Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So the time has come once again to honor a time-honored tradition here on this channel and to give you guys my list of the very best movies of the year. Yes, this was the very first video that I even made on my channel back in 2019, talking about the best movies of 2018. So these videos always mean something special to me. Now, unfortunately, last year, or at least in 2020, I wasn't able to do this video because there were so few options due to the whole pandemonium situation that was happening in the world. Like, I don't know if you heard about that, but it was a whole thing. And unfortunately, the cinemas were closed for the majority of the year and the movie release schedule was bonkers. Like, it went off the damn rails. So I wasn't able to see all of the 2020 releases that I had planned to. And I felt like it would be kind of pointless to make a best of 2020 movies list with so few films having actually been watched. So I decided to wait until 2021 to see more of those 2020 releases, as well as lump them together with the 2021 releases. And so now I have this hybrid list here of the very best of what the last 2 years of film has had to offer. Now, before we dive into this list, I do have a couple of disclaimers, as I usually do when it comes to these videos. And the first one up is that, of course, I was not able to see every single movie that came out in 2020 and in 2021. I did see substantially more films in 2021, so that was a success. But unfortunately, because of the great backlog that 2020 created, there were so many films coming out every single week, and some did slip through the cracks. I did recently do a kind of roundup of what I've been watching for some of the films that I didn't get a chance to review on my channel, but I already knew probably wouldn't be making on this list. And so you can go ahead and check out that video if there are a few films that you are curious to hear my thoughts about that won't be making it on this list. And of course, if you have any recommendations of your own of movies that you think is just absolutely abysmal that they're not on this list, I would absolutely love to see them down in the comments below, as well as, of course, your lists, your best of 2020 and 2021 lists in the comments as well. And finally, before we get to it, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. And since this is the very last 2021 based video before we start a whole new era in 2022, I did just want to say up top a massive thank you to each and every one of you who have checked out my reviews this past year, have watched my reviews and all of the lists, the top 10 lists, top 5 lists that I do, as well as some deep diving videos that I do just on a whim. I really appreciate all of the support and all of the engagement that you have with my channel. It really means the world to me. So yeah, thank you so much for the great times in 2020 and 2021 in the channel, and here's to an even better 2022. Now, without further ado, let's get into my list of the very best movies of 2020 and 2021. Okay, so because we're going to be diving into 2 years worth of movie releases, I thought it would be a little bit unfair. I thought it'd be a little bit unfair to expect me to only come up with a list of the top 10. Okay, like, give me a little bit more leeway. Okay, so instead of coming up with 20, which I could have, okay, I could have made this really long, but instead of doing that, I decided instead to do 15 films. And that makes sense because if you've watched my best TV shows of 2021 video, you already know that I decided to go with 15 shows as well because I'm indecisive. So we're going to be doing the same thing here with 15 movies to explore. And starting us off at number 15, we have Soul. This was the 2020 Pixar release that came out at the very end of the year. It was actually, it's unceremoniously dropped on Disney Plus for no extra cost, much to the chagrin of Pixar. But the real draw of this film, much like with many of the other Pixar films, was the fact that the story itself took on these really deep, meaningful and complex subject matters and packaged them into this really enjoyable animated film. This is Pixar's wheelhouse. Like, this is what they do. It's their bread and butter, okay? And here we have a case where they did it exceptionally well. Now, the reason why it's not higher up on my list, because there are a few animated movies that are higher here, is because for me personally, this film didn't didn't quite hit as hard as it did for some other people. I know that people adored Soul, and perhaps I need to go back and rewatch it to really see what you guys were seeing. But to me, what kind of dampened the effect of the story, the power of the story, was the fact that like half of the film was centered on that like ghost spirit character who's voiced by Tina Fey. Like, I was getting Princess and the Frog flashbacks, okay? Like, why can't we just have the story about this black character without it turning into some hijinks where he turns into an animal? Like, that was the disappointing part. That was the disappointing part. I felt like whilst, you know, Tina Fey's animated character, you know, had a lot of heart to her, she went through a really interesting character arc herself and learned a lot during the story. Whilst that was all very touching and heartwarming and wonderful, at the end of the day, it was supposed to be animated Jamie Foxx's movie, and she kind of stole some of the limelight. Like, she kind of stole some of the limelight, unfortunately. And, you know, he's not even getting the Disney Plus spin-off like she is. So that's even worse to me. But when it comes to Soul overall, I do feel like it is a very strong entry into Pixar's lineup. But overall, I would say that definitely Soul has a lot going for it. It has an excellent score, beautiful animation, stunning animation. I mean, it didn't win the Oscar for nothing, okay? And a great concept as well. The writing is really strong. The only thing that let it down for me personally was having this split between Jamie Foxx's animated character and Tina Fey's animated spirit character, who kind of stole the show a little bit in the latter half. Okay, so next up at number 14 is a lesser known movie that really left a great impression on me, and that is Apple TV Plus's The Banker from 2020. Now, this is a film that like no one talked about, and I think it's because I believe there was some like controversy surrounding the filmmaker, so maybe that's what put a dampener on things. But I think The Banker was like excellent. I think The Banker was like a really great film, again, that no one talked about. I do have a review of the film on my channel, so you can go ahead and check it out if you're curious to hear my full thoughts. But I just think that the concept of the film, which centers on these black men who start their own bank in the South in America, because during this time where it's set in like the 1950s and 60s, you know, black people weren't allowed to have their own banks, one, and two, when it came to banking, it was a very complex system that was based in a lot of racism, okay, a lot of discrimination with these incredibly high interest rates, and if you're even allowed a loan in the first place so that you can start a business of your own, just a bunch of discriminatory measures being used in these banks to prevent black people from being able to access funds to create, you know, livelihoods, to buy homes, to start businesses, to elevate their social class. That's something that the system was designed to prevent them from being able to do. And so we see these two men, portrayed by Anthony Mackie and Samuel L. Jackson, trying to break through those barriers and starting their own bank. But because of the laws surrounding who can own a bank and whatnot, they have to use this white guy who's portrayed by Nicholas Hoult as the kind of face of the bank. And that's such an interesting concept, but also seeing Anthony Mackie's characters like come up, you know, the fact that he had this ingenious intellectual mind, especially for mathematics, and seeing where that was born from and his humble beginnings. The whole story to me was fascinating and captivating, and the film as a whole, whilst it's tackling a very serious issue, also has some very endearing and funny moments, especially when they're trying to train Nicholas Holt's character for him to actually feel like a convincing banker, like a man who could convincingly own a bank, even though like he's like a janitor or something. I'm not sure what he was, but he certainly wasn't a banker, okay? The whole story is fascinating, great performances all around, and then you have the execution being carried out super well. I feel like it's a shame that this movie was so underrated on Apple TV Plus, but if you haven't watched it, then I would highly recommend you do. Okay, so next up at number 13, we have yet another entry from Pixar in 2021's Luca, which was also dropped unceremoniously on Disney Plus for no extra cost. Yes, you know, that's right. You heard me correctly. Luca is at number 13. It's higher than Soul. I know it's crazy. I know it's crazy and wacky and wild, but listen, okay? Luca gave me the feels. I don't know if it's because of the time I was watching it. Like, I don't know if it was because it came out in the summer and I just felt so, you know, over this whole panoramic situation that we're living in. Like, I don't know, but it really got me in the feels. The story about friendship, the story about self-discovery, about breaking through all of these restrictions and trying to discover oneself and a different culture and, you know, vying for a Vespa, like all of it. All of it was brilliant. All of it was magnifico. I loved it from every single second, truly. And then, of course, you have that twist. Okay, you have that Disney twist where the characters are actually sea monsters and it's based off of like these Italian folklore that the filmmaker himself grew up with, I believe. But overall, it's just a beautiful story. Yes, it is one of the smaller Pixar films. It's not as grand as an Incredibles, and it's not as, you know, existential as a Soul, but I do feel like that small, meaningful story about friendship and about dreams and dreaming beyond what you've known your whole life, you know, very Little Mermaid in that way as well, alongside the fact that they also come from the sea, I just think was so endearing. And then you pair that with a great voice cast, like you have Jacob Tremblay voicing the character of Luca himself, and then you have Jack Dylan Grazer voicing Alberto, his friends that he meets along his journey. You have Emma Berman voicing Julia, who is just so adorable. She is as cute as a button, okay? I love her. And also her father as well. He is such a great character. I think one of the most memorable parts of the movie was when Alberto, who doesn't know how to mind his own business, but he asks Julia's father why he has only one arm, and he says something along the lines of, "This is the way that I came into the world." And I just thought that was so beautiful. I love the fact that they didn't invent some kind of, you know, backstory, some traumatic backstory, which would have been completely valid anyways, but they just said, like, this character was born with a disability, he has one arm, but it's just the way that he was born, it's the way that he came into this world, as he says. I thought that was a beautiful sentiment. Like, that's something that truly just lasted with me. So yeah, I just think this story is incredibly touching, and of course the film itself is beautifully animated because of course it comes from Pixar, and honestly it breaks my heart that we didn't get to see this one on the big screen because I think it was wholly deserving. Okay, so next up at number 12 we have yet another animated movie from 2021 with Ron's Gone Wrong. This is yet another movie about friendship that really surprised me with how much it really landed, like how much it really resonated with me. But this film's twist isn't that it's about sea monsters, but rather it's about technology. It's about social media, these technologies that are developed to make us more social, to make us feel like we have more friends around us, but how they can also end up making us feel more isolated than ever before. I feel like that's a fascinating subject matter that honestly I think this film delves into very, very well. Surprisingly well, considering how underplayed this film was. I believe it's another Fox release, so even though it is under the Disney umbrella, the Fox release has really got the short end of the stick this year. What? It barely got any playtime at all, especially in cinemas. Like, it landed on Disney Plus, again, unceremoniously, rather quickly, and I ended up checking it out on Christmas Day, but I'm so glad I did because it really did warm my heart. I felt like the story was done really, really well. I loved the character of Ron so much. That's the thing. When you have an animated robot, like technological character, they need to be adorable. They need to be adorable to make up for the deficit of, you know, human emotions that they can convey on their faces. And I think Ron absolutely achieved that. I would definitely put him alongside the likes of WALL-E from Pixar and Baymax from Disney. All under the Disney umbrella, as I said. But yeah, I definitely think Ron was such an endearing character, and that was the key to all of this. But then you also have the human character in this story, and that is Barney, who funnily enough is also voiced by Jack Dylan Grazer. Like, he was really busy with the animation voicing this past year. But Barney is this kind of socially awkward kid who's in school, and he doesn't really have many friends, or any friends really, at the beginning of the story, because he's not, you know, hip with the kids. Like, he doesn't have the latest Bee-Bot, which is this like robot that follows you around spouting social media in your face, and I'm sure programmed ads in your face as well. But the Bee-Bots are hugely popular, and they're owned by pretty much everyone except him, and that kind of makes him an outsider, you know, which is ironic, of course, because the idea that these robots that are supposed to make you super sociable and make you a ton of friends ends up isolating people is definitely a theme that runs throughout the film. And this theme is explored very well and from all different angles also. But in the case of Barney, he does eventually manage to get himself a Bee-Bot, but the one that he got, or rather the one that his father procured suspiciously, was a broken one. It was a faulty Bee-Bot, and so he has some quirks about him that the other Bee-Bots don't have. But as a result, it makes him so unique, and it makes him so personable, really, and he becomes fast friends with Barney. And so we explore the friendship between Barney and Ron, and honestly, it's just so charming. Like, it's just so heartwarming. I was smiling from ear to ear throughout the entire film. I think it was absolutely phenomenal, and like I said, the exploration of the effect, especially the negative effect on young kids of social media and this overexposure to this kind of technology, was done really well throughout the film. Okay, so next up at number 11, we have a 2020 release, and we're back in the live action realm with Sound of Metal. First of all, I have to say, Riz Ahmed was robbed. Like, I don't know what of. I don't know what of. Robbed of attention, robbed of awards. He was just robbed in general. Riz Ahmed in Sound of Metal, iconic, like legendary, incredible. So for those of you who don't know, he portrays the main character, who is part of this band, and he is a drummer, so he's constantly exposed to extremely loud noises, and one day he ends up going deaf. Like, he can no longer hear, which is a shocking revelation, as you can imagine, for anyone, but particularly for someone who's a musician and relies on their ears to work, like to actually perform. And so this film explores the story of this guy who's trying to relearn everything, like pretty much everything that he has absorbed from his surroundings, from his whole life, and trying to acclimate into this new normal that he's been forced into. And this film does a spectacular job diving into these themes, giving us this real insight into how much of a shock and just how much of a fish out of water this character is, you know, having to relearn everything in such a short period of time and readjust, you know, how he absorbs his surroundings. And I just think it was absolutely brilliant. It was an absolutely brilliant film, very understated, very grounded, but with great performances, like I said, by Riz Ahmed, but also by Paul Raci, who portrays this mentor in this Center for the Deaf, and he is the center of this community of deaf people and people who are hard of hearing, and he helps Riz Ahmed's character in the process of trying to, you know, understand and accept and even thrive in this new normal that he's in. And also, I'm not like one of those technical girls who can talk about, you know, cinematography and lighting and, you know, color correction and all of that with any real authority. Like, really, I'm not. Okay, but I will say, okay, even to my ears, I did notice the really incredible sound design that is used here. The sound effects that are used really do a great job of conveying what the character is feeling in that moment where he loses his hearing. And also, when he puts on a hearing aid, those scenes are fascinating and excellently done. So yeah, the sound design and sound editing, whichever one it is, or perhaps even both, I think are exceptional, which makes perfect sense for a film that dives into the experience of a deaf person. And also, might I say, just as a general point, I love the fact that we're starting to see more stories being told about deaf people, or films that feature deaf people in them. I mean, speaking of Sound of Metal, you know, we also have Lauren Ridloff in this film, and she makes an appearance appearance in Marvel's The Eternals, which, spoiler alert, isn't going to be making an appearance on this list. But yeah, I think it's great that we have this real life deaf actress being thrust into the MCU, this huge franchise, giving that kind of exposure to someone who is deaf. I think is great representation. It's a shame that the film isn't the best. But then of course we also had A Quiet Place, which kind of, I don't want to say started the trend, but it definitely put a deaf character at the forefront of what became a very successful and very well-known movie. And then of course we've had the Hawkeye series, which featured a couple of deaf characters, and there's even another movie on this very list that also features some deaf characters, and you know, you'll find out all about that very soon. But I just think that is a great movement that we're starting to see in the representation of people with disabilities. Okay, so now we're getting into the top 10 list. This is where I would usually start if I was behaving, if I was being good and sticking to my top 10 agenda, but this year I scrapped that, and so now we're only just getting into number 10. And here at number 10 we have 2021's The Harder They Fall. Welcome to the new decade. Welcome, gather round children, gather round. Welcome to the new decade where we have not one, but 2 movies a year exploring the lives of black cowboys. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Both of them starring Idris Elba, by the way. Like, it must be 2021. Only in 2021 would this happen. And honestly, I love to see it. But I will say, of the 2, you know, spoiler alert again for the rest of this list, I would say that The Harder They Fall was the one. She was the girl who made it on this list. The Harder They Fall, first and foremost, like, yes, we have the great representation of black cowboys. We love to see it. For the longest time, Hollywood has been acting like the only cowboys in existence during this era were white, but that wasn't true. Like, that wasn't the case. Why are you lying, Hollywood? So, you know, now we're starting to get to the truth. And even though this isn't a non-fictional story, it is fiction, but the characters portrayed in this film were actually real. And so we have this great combination of like real life and real history, and this really crazy, kooky story that kind of borrows from a lot of the kind of Western tropes that we have seen throughout the decades. So I loved it. I loved it. But first and foremost, I loved it not just because it was a film about black cowboys, although that's the reason why I checked it out for sure, because please, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, Westerns, boo. Westerns, boo. I don't care. But black cowboy Westerns, you have my interest. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. But then you have the stylization of it all. This movie was directed by James Samuel, I believe it's pronounced, aka The Bullets, and he is a black British, might I add, a black British, we love to see it, director who has a musical background. Like, he has a background in music producing, and also he's a singer-songwriter himself. So you can see the influence of that in his work in this film, because it is so heavily stylized. And yes, you know, it does draw from, you know, other Western films from the past, but also it has that kind of, you know, music video quality to it, and sometimes to its detriment, because I do think it suffers from the lack of cohesion a little bit at times, where, you know, there are certain segments of the film that are just captivating and electric, and then the connective tissue between those segments aren't as strong. But when it is good, it's superb. Also, the cast. Also, did you see that cast list? What? Have you seen the cast list for The Harder They Fall? Like, it's wild. Lakeith Stanfield, Regina King, Idris Elba, Jonathan Majors. Are you joking? Okay, so next up at number 9, we have 2021's Coda. Now, this is yet another movie that comes from a streaming service, but, you know, Apple TV Plus wishes it was on the level of Netflix. Like, I'm sorry, okay, I still have some free Apple TV Plus because I got a new phone this year or last year. But, you know, in the meantime, I'm enjoying some Apple TV Plus content, and I have to say, I was just blown away by Coda. Coda is a wonderful, wonderful film about a family of deaf people where only one of the family members, the daughter, is able to hear, and so she basically acts as the family's, you know, interpreter. And this is a responsibility that she's had for a very, very long time, pretty much for her whole life. But but it's come to a point now where she's reaching that age where she's got to make these crucial decisions that will affect the rest of her life, and she wants as many options available to her as possible, and that may not be something that is in line with her family's future. So it's a really interesting story delving into this experience, the experience of this teenage girl who has dreams and goals of her own, but it means potentially having to leave her family behind. And because they are, you know, deaf individuals, they haven't been accustomed to navigating the world without her in a very, very long time. So there is a lot of tension there. But at the center of this story, you really have a lot of heart here. You have a lot of heart between the family members. I mean, they are just so organic. They feel so authentic as a family unit. And here, once again, as I mentioned with Sound of Metal, you have the representation of deaf characters predominantly portrayed by deaf actors, which I think is astonishing. Like, again, that's how you know you're in the 2020s, because this kind of representation didn't exist a few years ago even, and we just love to see it, especially when you have this beautiful story being told simultaneously. And also, as I touched on with The Sound of Metal, another thing that comes with the portrayal of these deaf characters is finding these creative ways to, you know, portray deafness on screen, especially for audiences who can hear. And, you know, the classic way would be to just, you know, turn everything silent, but I think this film does more than that. Like, this film has parts where, for example, the daughter is performing because she loves to sing. Like, that is her passion, and that's something that she dives into in the series of events that play out in this film. And so you have her parents attending her performance, and they're not able to hear. Like, they're not able to hear their daughter sing, but they're able to observe people's reactions to her performance, and they're able to see her on stage and try and absorb the same emotion, the same impact that her performance has on the rest of the hearing audience. And I think the film does an extraordinary job of conveying this, trying to allow the audience to step into the shoes of, you know, people who are deaf, who can't hear, and what it would be like to be in that scenario where you want to support your daughter, you know, you want to show up for her, but at the same time you can't really engage in this passion that she has in the same way that other people can, because you can't hear her when she's singing. Okay, so next up at number 8 we have Encanto. Yes, absolutely. Yep, absolute. What? Are you surprised? Don't be silly. You knew it was going to make an appearance here. Like, don't be silly. I already have a review on Encanto, so I won't say too much about the movie here, but it's extraordinary. Yup. This is what we've been waiting for from Disney for a while now. They've given us a few offerings here and there, and it's been cute, like, it's been fun, but Encanto takes it up a notch, in my opinion. Like, Encanto gives us some of that flavour from the Disney Renaissance era that we've been missing. I truly think it's that great, and I feel like it really captured the imagination, especially of its Hispanic viewers. Like, I noticed in my review of Encanto that there were so many of you guys who are actually from Colombia, for instance, talking about how great it felt to have that kind of representation from a Disney movie for the Colombian culture, you know, as wide and vast as it may be, some of it to at least be represented in this film, to be showcased in this film in such a beautiful way, such an imaginative way, but also in a way that's kind of grounded in some level of reality, because of course one of the themes of the film is exploring the experiences of immigrants and, you know, migration and escaping hardships to try and find a better life for yourself and your family. I think this film was astonishing. I think this film was great. And of course, it wouldn't be a great Disney animated movie without some musical numbers. And listen, Surface Pressure, still number one. Surface Pressure. When I saw Encanto in cinemas and then I quickly went to the Disney Vivo YouTube page, I saw that the musical numbers didn't have that many views, and I was like, oh, is everyone sleeping on this film? But then it landed on Disney Plus with no extra cost for Christmas Eve, and all of a sudden everyone discovered Surface Pressure, the song of the year, in my opinion. That song hit hits hard. That song hits so hard for me as an older sister. I was like, this is like, get out of my brain, Disney, get out of my brain, Lin-Manuel Miranda. It was crazy. But yeah, all of the songs in this film are spectacular, but that was by far my favorite. And overall, I just think yet another great heartwarming representation of this really beautiful family being explored in this film, but just from a completely different angle with a magical house to boot. Okay, so next one up at number 7, we have The White Tiger. Now, you may have forgotten about this little Netflix movie from earlier on in 2021, but I didn't. I didn't, okay, because I love me some social commentary, especially when it's about, you know, capitalism, especially when it's about classism. Ooh, I love to eat that stuff up. Yum, yum, yum. And that's what this film is all about, and it was executed brilliantly to boot, so of course it was going to be making it on my list. I loved everything about this film. I felt like it was very clever. I feel like the story itself was done so well from start to finish. It was incredibly engaging because you have this kind of come up story that also focuses on the caste system in India and gives us some insight, little peek into that world. Again, it's not enough to kind of educate us on the complexity of the system overall, but just giving us a little peek of that was already so fascinating. And I feel like having this story that explores the lives of the haves and have-nots in this corner of the world is something that we don't see often enough, especially coming from, you know, a major Hollywood studio, aka Netflix in this case, but having it be represented here was just really eye-opening. And on top of that, we have some great performances, in particular with Adarsh Gaurav leading the cast. I think he was brilliant here. But yeah, if you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on the movie, you can go ahead and check out my review. But I just thought it was a really phenomenal film that tackled a really interesting topic from an angle that we don't often see. And next up at number 6, we have 2020's The Gentleman. Now, this is not the most recent Guy Ritchie film, inexplicably. He seems to just be pumping this stuff out. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on, but Guy Ritchie seems to be, you know, intent on becoming the Bruce Willis of the directing world and just pumping out a bunch of these films on a yearly basis. Before that was a thing, okay, that was happening with last year's Wrath of Man. We had The Gentleman in 2020. I love that film. I love The Gentleman. In fact, I'm pretty sure I was convinced for like a good portion of 2020 that that was the best film of the entire year. And honestly, like, it almost is. Clearly from this list, I love The Gentleman. Again, I have a review of The Gentleman if you want to hear more of my thoughts. But this is like Guy Ritchie getting back to his roots. Like, I'm a fan of Guy Ritchie, okay? Just to put it out there, I am a fan of Guy Ritchie films. Like, I like his Sherlock films. I liked Man from U.N.C.L.E. Even though I could never watch that film ever again. I'll never be able to see that film the same way ever again. So, you know, R.I.P. Man from U.N.C.L.E. But anyways, I'm really big Guy Ritchie fan, okay? So when I saw the trailer for The Gentleman, I was like, oh, I'm intrigued. And honestly, I think the film itself was a great success. Like, it was, again, returning to his roots. It was hilarious. I love the different kind of tricks and the editing styles that he uses to tell stories in a really interesting way and incorporating flashbacks. And also Hugh Grant. So this is the beginning of the Hugh Grant renaissance that he's just been quietly having, where he portrays this kind of wacky character, this like Cockney character. He portrayed a very similar character in Death to 2020 and Death to 2021, but it's just kind of this like unhinged character that you don't know whether to, you know, take seriously or not. But I think he did it best in The Gentleman. I really do think that he should have gotten some recognition, like at least the Golden Globe nom for best comedic performance, because he really was that guy. Like, he was really funny in The Gentleman, and his chemistry with Charlie Hunnam in those scenes where in the kitchen, I just think were super. I think they were unmatched, okay? The subsequent films though, this new one that's coming out in 2022, I'm not so sure about. I mean, I did see Wrath of Man, and no, I wasn't a fan of that one. So far, The Gentleman is coming out on top in this like annual release schedule that he's coming up with for some reason. Okay, so now we're diving into the top 5. Now we're getting into the creme de la creme of the last 2 years, in my opinion. Starting us off at number 5, we have Another Round. Remember Another Round? Do you remember? Because I do. Because I do. Another Round is superb. Another Round is brilliant, okay? So Another Round is a 2020 Danish film that was directed by Thomas Vinterberg, and it starred Mads Mikkelsen, who gave a phenomenal performance in the film. And it's basically about this group of guys that are kind of discontent with their lives. You know, they're kind of in this like rocky period, they're feeling this dissatisfaction, and they want to break through it. And so they decide to make a pact together under the false pretense of it being an experiment. I don't know by whose scientific standards, okay, but under the pretense of it being an experiment, that they will start relying on small amounts of alcohol to go through their day, basically, to like, you know, increase the vitality of their life and to make them feel more alive as they're going through this, you know, midlife crisis, basically, until of course things go wrong, like things go off the rails and they have to deal with the consequences of that. But overall, it's a very small, contained story focusing on the personal lives of these men, in particular Mads Mikkelsen's character, and you know what he's going through in his mind, you know, being faced with so many challenges like left, right and center, you know, even down to his students looking at him like, oh, you're so boring, you're so dead. And all of a sudden he gets a flavor of what could be, of what life could look like if only he could just rely on a little bit of alcohol to take him through the day, to take the edge off. But of course that reliance develops into something that is uncontrollable and again unscientific, whatever. And so that's when things go off the rails and we have to see him deal with the consequences of that. So whilst it's an interesting premise, it's still a very small story, and I think what really sells it is the excellent writing and also the excellent performances of everyone across the board. But of course Mads Mikkelsen is at the center of the story and he gives a great performance all around. Okay, so next up at number 4 we have 2021's King Richard. Now I'm sure I don't need to explain to you guys why King Richard is so high up on this list, or even why it's on this list at all. Like, surely you understand that part, right? First of all, Will Smith, give him all of the gold. Give it to him now. Listen, okay, there may be some contenders coming up. I'm not gonna lie, there may be some contenders, but as of right now, I think give him all the golds. Give him all the golds that he deserves, okay? He was astonishing as the titular character. And I also think the cast overall was brilliant. But here we finally have the telling of the story of two of the most incredible, iconic, legendary and important figures in sports ever. And they are of course the Williams sisters themselves, and obviously as someone who is black, someone, I don't know if you noticed, okay, and a woman, I can say that this film meant a lot to me. I found it to be incredibly inspiring, especially as someone who grew up in the era of Venus and Serena's like peak at their heights of their careers. So I just found this so inspiring, you know, so heartwarming, seeing how much work and the work ethic that was instilled into them, that it took for them to get to the point that they did, the legends, the icons that they became. And this is just the beginning of their story. We could even have a follow-up where we include like the heights of their careers, but to explore all of this through the lens primarily of Richard, their father, I think was a really interesting idea that definitely paid off, because we got to see how much work it took from his end and from that of his then wife to make all of this happen to begin with. And I just think overall the film is tight. The film is tight, like it has you from start to finish. And then you have that ending, you have the match at the end that had me at the the edge of my seat, even as someone who doesn't care about tennis, even as someone who literally forgets the rules of tennis every year when Wimbledon comes around. I was on the edge. I was on the edge of my seat because the stakes were sky high. Speaking of sky high stakes, at number 3 we have Judas and the Black Messiah. What? Oh, but they didn't have to, but they did. First of all, Daniel Kaluuya, listen, okay, I have to give credit where credit's due to my fellow Londoner, okay, are you kidding me? Daniel Kaluuya, a gift. His performance, I don't need to tell you that his performance in this film was good. He has the Oscar. So, I know, everyone knows. Moving on. And then you have Lakeith Stanfield. Please. And he is the co-star. I mean, he's technically the main character in the film. Like, he's portraying the Judas, okay? But unfortunately, during awards season, Warner Brothers decided to take a pun and put him in the supporting actor category because they felt that he was strongest there, I'm guessing. But he gave a great performance as well. And this film is telling the story of Fred Hampton, a prominent Black Panther activist who really made great changes to the Black community surrounding him in his hometown. He was all about helping people and, trying to provide resources to those who had limited resources. And I think it is a really important and fascinating story to see how this person who was vilified by the authorities, vilified by the FBI, to the point where his community was infiltrated by a Judas who is portrayed by Lakeith Stanfield. And you see that betrayal play out, and you see the impact that had on the community as a whole. And overall, I think the story is just, first of all, so important. It opened my eyes to so much surrounding Fred Hampton and surrounding the Black Panther movement. But also the film itself was just so captivating. It had my attention from start to finish. Well, I will say that's the only reason, it's kind of the main reason why it's not like number 1, because these other 2 films had me like on the edge of my seat from start to finish, okay, no lie. But Judas and the Black Messiah, I would say like the beginning of the last third kind of slips a little bit, and then we pick it up again at the end. Like at the end where we have the scene with the FBI infiltrating the house of the Black Panther members, please, that's when you're just like, I had my heart in my throat, okay? I felt sick, I felt angered. So yeah, like I feel like there were moments of, lulls here and there, but overall just a phenomenal film, like without question. Okay, so the next 2 films that I have for number 2 and number 1 are very different in subject matter, but they do have one thing in common, and that is that the cinema going experience was unmatched. And I think that's fitting, considering for the past 2 years going to the cinema has been more of a luxury than ever before, because of course cinemas were closed, and then even after they opened there were large questions about the safety of attending cinemas to begin with in this panoramic situation. So considering all of that, I do feel like it was more important than ever that if people were going to see films at the cinema going experience needed to be out of this world. And I think in the case of these last 2 films, the very top 2 in my list, I would say that was very much the case. And so at number 2 we have technically 2019's, but I watched it in 2020, 1917. Wow. I remember to this day watching 1917 and literally my mind was blown. Okay, so listen, let me just give you some context on my thoughts going into the film. I thought it was all a gimmick. Yeah, I was a naysayer. Okay, I thought it was all a gimmick. I saw the movie was starting to get some hype again at the very end of 2019. People were like, what's going on with this 1917 situation directed by Sam Mendes that's like designed to look like one single shot? Like, what's going on there? And I was like, oh, okay, here we go. Like, he's going to talk about how it's like looks like one single shot, and that's going to be what everyone focuses on during awards season. And it was pretty much. But man, was it done right? Man, was it done? It's a gimmick, but it's done very, very well. Oh, I have to give the credit where the credit is due. Guys, the film is brilliant. The film is the most visceral representation of war, especially World War One, I have ever seen. And again, I watched it in the cinema. Edge of my seat the whole time. Like, someone please explain, because you feel like you're the main character in the series of events. Like, you feel like what's happening to George Mackay's character is happening to you too. You feel like you are in that world, and so his emotions become yours, his experiences become yours, and the whole film overall just feels like interactive, this kind of hybrid between, you know, a first-person shooter game and a movie. It's just astonishing. It is a feat. And on top of that, the cinematography. Are you kidding? Roger Deakins, please. That scene that takes place in the ruins of the church with like the background of that beautiful, is it the sunset or the sunrise? But then there's also a bunch of fire there. That was just astonishing. Of course he won the Oscar for Best Cinematography. Of course he did. And let's not go a second longer without talking about the main character himself, who's bringing us through his experiences the whole time, George Mackay. He was robbed. He was robbed of everything. I think he should have deserved way more credit than he got for his role here, because he should have had nominations coming through the wazoo. Like, he should have had like too many nominations to even know what to do with them, because he was so excellent in that film. And I truly think that that's what made it work in a lot of ways, because even though people always joke that Sam Mendes is, you know, trying to borrow from Christopher Nolan, one thing that I've always said about Christopher Nolan's work is that it lacks heart. It lacks emotion. A lot of his work feels like it was carried out by a very competent robot, but here Sam Mendes has his emotion. He has his heart, his emotional core in George Mackay's character. And guess who made that happen? Sam Mendes, sure, but also George Mackay. So where was his nomination? Where was his nomination? Unacceptable. But the whole film was just a feat. It was just an incredible accomplishment in filmmaking. And yes, whilst I did go in there thinking it was just going to be a gimmick, like, oh, it looks like one shot, and sure, it's not actually one shot and there are hidden edits in there. But none of that matters, because when you're in that film, when you're in that experience, it feels real. It's visceral, it is effective, and it's honestly one of the most memorable cinema going experiences that I have ever had. And speaking of memorable cinema going experiences, it should come as no surprise. At number one, we have Spider-Man No Way Home. Oh. Remember what I said about, you know, good cinematography and an accomplishment in filmmaking, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's cool. That's great. We love to see it. But Spider-Man No Way Home. First of all, no, small spoilers here, but, you know, the fact that they were able to stretch back to whole different eras of various franchises, incorporate it into yet another franchise, being the MCU, the biggest franchise of all time, and have all of this happening, but at the same time, a very personal, a very emotional story at the core here of what is happening within Peter Parker's life, you know, Tom Holland's Peter Parker's life. The fact that they were able to balance all of that and make it emotionally resonant, like how, but also well done. Like how, but also a huge accomplishment. And also, even though a lot of the big reveals for this movie were spoiled for us a long time ago on social media, especially those of us who like to follow movie news, they were still really impactful, really surprising, you know, really exciting when we were watching it in the cinema. That effect, that enjoyment wasn't dampened by the fact that a lot of these big reveals were already known amongst audiences, especially, you know, fans. And I just think that's amazing. We kept getting surprised, we were entertained as hell, and the movie going experience here was just electric, at least in my cinema. Unfortunately, not everyone would have gotten that same experience as I did watching that film for the first time. And I'll say this as well, like I saw it a second time, and honestly it wasn't as phenomenal because the audience that I was with was just so dead. I was upset. I was so upset. Like, the audience was so dead. There were a few cheers here and there, but it was honestly pathetic. The first time I saw the film with the live audience of students who had rushed out of school sure to see Spider-Man No Way Home was just one of the most memorable experiences in the cinema ever. Like, truly ever. But I truly do think that Spider-Man No Way Home was just a marker of everyone coming back together during these panoramic times and experiencing a feel-good, thrilling, exciting, crowd-pleasing movie that really did please the crowd and made a ton of money whilst doing so. And it just felt like old times, I think. That's what's so endearing about it. It felt like a return to the good old days of 2019. And I think after the years that 2020 and 2021 ended up being, it was a very welcome one. But that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my list of the very best movies from 2020 and 2021, it's time for you guys to let me know what your lists are down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch you videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.